Welcome to the Altered Call podcast. Today we're going to discuss your mind. This area is secretly the cause of pain and distraction for many men. Is your mind a place of peace or a house of horror? My name is Pillischafske. I believe that man is poorly equipped for modern life. I believe that beatings will continue until morale improves, and I believe that you are uniquely created to reflect God's glory in the world. Recapping the framework. As Christians, we are meant to bring glory to God generally through our purpose and specifically through our various callings. The enemy wants to prevent this by forcing us to stumble in any of an infinite number of ways. Stewardship is the application of our current knowledge and ability to defend our lives against that enemy. The discipleship path is an optional framework that you can use to build and maintain standards that relate to self, family, vocation, and church. This is meant to create a baseline of stewardship from which we can explore specific callings of God. We will start by establishing minimum standards strong enough to ensure that we are being faithful and on which we can build our desired lives. We will maintain these standards until we are giving a specific calling of God, which we will prioritize accordingly. Properly maintained, your mind can be a refuge, a place where you can go for peace and solitude, a place of calm and quiet. I'm told that some people cultivate this mindset naturally and have never struggled with the content of their mind. If you are in fact that type of person, then you are incredibly blessed. For many more of us, our mind can become an inescapable hellscape, so devoid of hope that instead of battling our demons, we are tempted into distraction or drugging ourselves to find temporary relief. While I think that everyone can in some way benefit from this episode, it is the people towards the latter end of that spectrum that this episode will target, because that was my reality. And now, after many years of careful pruning, my mind is finally calm. I understand all too well the temptation to view that as an impossibility. In my formerly chaotic state, I didn't believe that it was possible either. But having been on the other side of it for several years now, I am excited to inform you that it is both possible and sustainable. That said, it will not be easy. You will be forced to pay attention to your thoughts and battle the unhelpful beliefs that you hold. But on the other end is a peace far beyond your current understanding. And today I want to call you slowly towards that reality. My brain has always moved at high speed. In school, I was always the first person done with a test or other timed activity simply because I thought quickly, admitted when I didn't know something, and I rarely spent any time second-guessing myself. This was paired with a frenetic energy that almost certainly warranted an ADHD diagnosis, but which was never explored because my mom was against such things and I was both high-functioning and largely stayed out of trouble in school. That said, I would constantly count letters and words, bricks, or ceiling tiles to give my brain the stimulation that it desired during school hours. While most of that sounds like a blessing, and it certainly can be, your brain is largely bound by what you feed it. And following the death of my father and subsequent traumas experienced at a young age, I started to feed my brain a steady diet of anger and disappointment. Angry music, violent images, and pornography were all allowed to flood my brain relentlessly for nearly a decade. And as such, my thoughts turned from erratic, but tame, to unpredictable and extremely dark. I remember repeatedly having the thought in my late teens that no one would be able to survive a day in my brain. It was unrelenting. I thank God regularly that I was able to avoid drugs and alcohol during this time frame, because I was an ideal candidate for those forms of self-destruction. Instead, I simply turned up the volume on my music, played video games constantly, and chased any dopamine hit that I could find. I could not be left alone with my thoughts under any circumstances. Lack of distraction could easily lead to chaotic spiraling, explosive rage, or dark fantasies. It was common at this time to endure countless sleepless nights as undistracted and alone I was at my most vulnerable. Endless streams of thought would flood in and lay siege to any peace that I could find. Eventually, I found that loading myself up on sugar and crashing into oblivion was a reasonable solution to this problem. One of the first things that I devoted to God upon my conversion was my music. I determined that I would feed my mind healthy messaging instead of the dark and brooding material that had come to dominate my collection. No dark messages, no odes to hopelessness, nothing violent or encouraging self-sabotage. My mind was the first place that became a temple for me, and slowly it began to heal. Having converted to a healthier diet, my darker thoughts slowly began to fade. In exchange, they were replaced by endless worries and anxiety over the future. These thoughts persisted until 5 or 6 years ago when I was finally able to hand those concerns to God and trust that His will would be sufficient. Now that sentence sounds easy, but ultimately it wasn't until I truly accepted that belief that I was able to find anything resembling peace. From there, I simply battled the intrusive thoughts that I no longer wanted to occupy my attention, and here we are today, in a place of peace and control over my mind. I've spent a lot of time explaining my story to tell you this. I can't speak with the authority of an expert that has studied this material in depth, but I do have the authority of someone who has taken this area from one of his greatest weaknesses to one of his undeniable strengths. I know what has worked for me, and I hope that is enough to get you started on your journey. Let's start with the piece that I stumbled into. Pay attention to your inputs. The quality and quantity of the material that you feed your brain matters. There are some people that are less impacted by certain types of stimulus than others, so I don't want to recommend anything too strongly. But if you are struggling in your thought life, then I encourage you to look for the inputs that might be feeding the types of thoughts that you struggle with, and cut those out of your life very aggressively. Here are a couple of things that I will put strong recommendations on. First of all, porn. I'm not even going to explain this one. We all know better. Discipline in this area is the real problem, not conviction. So get rid of it. Second is the news. News programs no longer serve the function that they claim. They do not exist to inform. They exist to incite. While many people think that they watch the news for information, they simply watch to reinforce their bias and for cheap entertainment as the soap opera that is modern politics plays out. Third, social media, or really anything tied to an algorithm. These tools exist to get you hooked, and whether it is intended or not, they feed you a stream of information that is largely misrepresentative of reality. Finally, anything that concentrates on hopelessness or despair should be consumed very carefully. While I understand the argument to engage with this material in small doses, if you are struggling with your thought life, then I would encourage you to abstain entirely. As you pull these inputs out of your life, you will benefit from replacing them with something else. I found my personal salvation in my newly discovered music, but you might consider reading books, visiting nature, physical activity, or increasing your adoption of spiritual disciplines for a season as you attempt to rewire your focus. The next step is to take control of the thoughts that remain. One of the most valuable things that I have ever learned is that you get to decide which thoughts are allowed to exist in your head. If you don't want to think about something, you don't have to. And once you get better at realizing which thoughts serve you, you can eliminate all of the other thoughts from your focus, resulting in both improved clarity and quiet. Again, I know how unrealistic this sounds if you are buried in intrusive thoughts, but with work, you can get there. In the beginning, start by simply denying a thought. It doesn't matter what it is, but once it appears in your mind, consciously switch your attention to something else. Depending on the thought, you may need to do this hundreds or even thousands of times. But eventually your mind will determine that route to be unproductive, and the thought will slowly begin to fade from your focus. If you need to physically move or speak over the thought in the short term, I am told that that can be helpful. But your job is to deny it access to your brain without medicating and without engaging in distraction. Like anything else, this is a skill that takes practice. Eventually it will be second nature, but in the beginning it will require focus and attention. Once you gain the ability to deny specific thoughts, you then gain the opportunity to determine which thoughts are allowed in your brain. This is done by determining which thoughts are useful and denying any thoughts that aren't. Here are some of the thoughts that are unhelpful. First is anything having to do with the future beyond the immediate. I understand the need to plan things like vacations or large events, and I think that there is value in planning for your future regarding things like finances. But the trick is to be less and less specific the further your vision extends from the present. Humans are very good at dealing with what is immediately in front of them or in the very near future. But as you extrapolate out, your vision gets blurred by a nearly infinite number of variables that you can neither understand nor control. The future belongs to God. Hold it with an open hand and focus on what is in front of you. Second is predicting the thoughts or actions of other people. Get out of other people's heads. You cannot fully understand how someone else thinks, and you certainly can't predict what they are going to do with any level of clarity. So stop trying. If you find value in knowing what someone is thinking or how they might act in the future, then ask them directly. But just like predicting your own future, there are far too many variables to consider, and any potential understanding gained comes at too high of a mental cost. Once they decide to take an action, you can respond accordingly, but you rarely gain an advantage from knowing that thing in advance. Next, we move on to worry and regret. Worrying about things is almost always a waste of time. When you find yourself worrying about something, what you need to decide is this: are you going to do anything about it? If the answer is yes, then you should stop worrying and do that thing. If the answer is no, then you should ignore the thought entirely. Let's say that you are worried about losing your job. You can convert this worry into action by either increasing your productivity or applying for other jobs in the event that the worry manifests. But if you aren't prepared to take productive action in that situation, then you should simply ignore the thought and wait for it to actualize. Either way, the worry itself is unproductive. Regret follows a similar logic. Apologize if you're going to apologize, restore anything that you are willing or able to restore, learn any valuable lessons from the experience, and then move on. Beyond that, no value is gained. During my last season of anxiety, which was 5 or 6 years ago now, I had a discussion with my therapist. I was playing blackjack at the time, and I kept getting nervous about losing money to bad luck or getting kicked out of casinos. She listened to me carefully and then told me that I wasn't suffering from anxiety at all, but that my body was assessing very real threats in my environment. Both of those things were very likely to occur if I continued playing, and the best thing that I could do was to either quit or consciously accept those outcomes. In this case, people actually were out to get me, and my body was correct in its assessment of the risk. It was up to me to decide if the freedom and income that this career enabled warranted this additional level of stress. Once I submitted my mind to those eventualities, I was able to re-engage without generating residual fear or sleepless nights. In the end, mastery of this area will require you to audit your thoughts at regular intervals. Again, with experience and skill, you can go for longer periods of time without this practice, but in the beginning, it may need to be practiced daily. Find a quiet place where you can think undisturbed by your surroundings. I personally like to sit outside in the sun. Then you simply want to close your eyes and observe your thoughts. You aren't trying to meditate or block out your thoughts. You are simply sitting on the side of the road and watching cars drive by. As soon as you see or hear a thought that you don't like, pluck it out of rotation using the denial strategy stated previously. My current filter is this. 1. Do I like this thought? 2. Is it helpful? 3. Am I going to do anything about it? If the answer to those questions is no, then it goes away and I don't think about it anymore. After a decade or more of doing this work, it is just that easy. I'm going to trust that you can start to form your own minimum standard by incorporating whatever is most appropriate from the ideas above. I do, however, want to mention 2 things here that might be a little less intuitive, but will help dramatically with your mind. Get connected to other people and start to understand your core beliefs. Mental issues are always worse in isolation. When it comes to this area of life, the enemy either wants you in unhealthy situations that you can't control, or he wants you alone. The enemy is not clever, and he is as lazy as you'll let him be, so don't make it easy for him. Get around healthy people as much as you can while you pursue healing in this area. We have a guideline in our group. If you feel a strong temptation to avoid group that week, then those are the nights that you need to come. Bad things happen, or get worse, when you are alone. As relates your beliefs, misunderstanding what you believe or what your beliefs mean can lead to constant stress or broken feedback loops, both of which will make mental issues much worse. I'm going to be starting a wisdom series around beliefs in a few weeks, so use that as a launching pad to begin understanding what is important to you and how best to pursue those things. At a societal level, there is the temptation to understand and have a strong opinion about all of the various political issues of the day. In reality, no one does this, and practically speaking, there is no reason to try. You will save a great deal of mental energy by accepting that you don't actually care about the vast majority of issues enough to have an opinion, let alone a strong and well-informed one. It also comes back to what you are going to do about it. Even if you genuinely did care about all of the issues, there is only so much of an impact that you can have. In my opinion, it is better to admit that you don't know, or better yet, don't care about most of the issues, and instead passionately focus on one or two issues that you do intend to understand and do something about. As relates to the other topics, just trust that God has put it in the hearts of other people to work towards His ends in those areas. Remember, you need to accept the reality of your situation before you can set an effective standard. If you struggle in this area, then set your standard at starting to gain control. If you are skilled in this area, then you probably only require simple maintenance. In order to clear the hurdles of glorifying God and helping to sustain the other areas of your life, you should use your ability to remain calm, mentally stable, and present in your environment as progressive metrics to determine your fruitfulness. It is commonly accepted that time heals all wounds, but I can tell you from experience that this axiom is stupid. Time simply takes you where you are already going. If you are bent on self-destruction, then time will take you there. If, however, you are focused on God and leverage that faith towards healing, then you will in fact be healed. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Altered Call Podcast. You can reach me by email using alex@alteredcall.com, or you can visit the website for additional information.